Are you stuck in the same old routine at work? Do you find yourself hitting a creative wall, unable to see beyond your current perspective? It's time to break free and unlock the power of fresh perspectives. David Gouthro here with Discover Fresh Perspectives. Today, we're going to get some from Cam Stewart, my guest for this week. So welcome, Cam.
Hey, David. Thanks for having me on.
So, Cam, I don't know a lot about you, but there's a few things that you said that intrigued me. I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be an interesting conversation. And one of the things that you talked about, well, in your background, you're a former police officer, but perhaps more interestingly, you talked about developing good relationships with Indigenous peoples, and it's so those of you that can't see Cam, he's an older white guy, kind of like me. So I'm curious how you came to this, Cam, and how also with credibility where people want to establish relationships with people different than themselves. How do you go about doing that in an authentic and a credible way? So we can start this conversation wherever you'd like to kick it off.
Yeah. Well, thanks, David. Yeah, I was a policeman in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And, it's probably in my 20th year. And I worked a lot in the streets, downtown Calgary in different areas. And later I realized I had negative perceptions towards Indigenous people. I fought them off the best I can for most of my career and didn't do anything untowards them, but I always felt that there was something amiss. And so I got a chance to go to an Aboriginal justice camp held down in Picani, which is in southern Alberta, on the reserve with Reg and Rose Crowshoe. And it was like, poof, why didn't I know all this, residential schools? This was like in 1999.
So Cam, I'm going to stop you for just a sec because you said something I'd like to go back to, but if we could just set the context for this. So you said that you had some perceptions or bias, wasn't the word that you used, but sort of the biases around Indigenous peoples. Maybe could you just, because those are behind you now. So, but
Yeah.
what were some of those that maybe other people can kind of go, I'm embarrassed to say it, but I kind of felt the same way. Is there any of those you'd be willing to share?
Oh, for sure. I mean, everything. I mean, I had lots of myths about Indigenous people, about them being, having more propensity towards alcoholism, gambling, addiction, that they weren't good parents or people, they weren't educated. And because that's all I saw as and I never had any education about Indigenous people when I was growing up, probably like you. I mean, we grew up in a time when there was no curriculum. And so everything I learned was word of mouth in the coffee shops. And of course, as a policeman, any negative things that I saw, they were reinforced by my negative interactions with those people that were the street people on the street. And of course, that's not the majority of Indigenous people. And I knew that, but because I had no other exposure to Indigenous people, besides, in Calgary and, people with substance abuse, or I was taking them to the detox center, sometimes, helping social services take away kids from their parents because of whatever was happening in their lives. Yeah, I had some real negative perceptions about those peoples.
So, and I suspect there's not too many listeners that have had their perception shaped by the same kind of experience, but it's been shaped by other ways, by what they read, what the people they talk to, all those kinds of things. So wherever we have them, you then had this kind of I don't want to say an awakening, but an eye-opening when you went this event down in south of southern Alberta. So sorry to interrupt, but just thinking, let's set the context for other people that this maybe, it doesn't apply to me. Well, maybe it does. So now let's dive down into that shift in your perception in life and what that was like and how that's transpired.
Yeah. So I spent a week with Indigenous people, and as well as some colleagues, fellow colleagues from the police departments. And not only did I learn things that history books never taught me, my family, even my police department didn't teach me, but I also got to see positive, educated Indigenous elders, knowledge keepers, leaders in the community that were well spoken. That all of a sudden it kind of shook me to the core of, okay, now I've got to do something different. I'm on a journey now, and I have to teach my people, my male, pale, and stale people.
Hmm.
Um, we need to move ahead. And this was even before the TRC, Truth and Reconciliation
Hmm.
Commission recommendations. But I had to go on my own journey, and before I could actually, I need to learn more and unlearn more. And then once I started on that path, I became an ally to communities, and learning how I could stand with them on their path and help my community, my police community, my general white community, or the communities that I represent or I belong to, the different organizations, how I could help them on a path of reconciliation.
S- So, and I apologize for interrupting, but I find this really fascinating. So, and because there's some words that people use out there, they might not all have a common understanding or the same understanding that you do of a word like ally. So, what is an ally, and what is an ally not that people may misunderstand?
Yeah, so I mean, an ally one, I think, is, when I'm in rooms where Indigenous people aren't there, I have to call out why, if we're talking about Indigenous issues or like homelessness or addiction, that maybe like calling out the organization or the group that's brought, hey, what, where are the voices? And making sure they're there. To standing with communities, and listening to what their issues are, and supporting them. I mean, I was a funder for many years.
Oh,
So I stood on funding committees, and and made sure that our methods were approachable and accessible to everyone, and that any barriers that were within our systems, that's where you call systemic stuff, discrimination or issues, to see why, what were our barriers in our systems that they weren't getting through, that some of their great programs or ideas weren't getting through. And so as an ally, I had to stand with them, sometimes shoulder to shoulder on issues that and advocate for. And sometimes I was behind the scenes moving my own organizations or my own people into a direction that was more accessible and inclusive.
so I'm not sure if I'm diving into something, a semantic differential that doesn't exist, but when I hear y- y- Are, as an ally, do you stand with someone or do something for someone? Because those to me have quite different understandings of how that would play itself out. And I use the term with. So how do you differentiate that from doing something for? Like, I think you said the stale old white guy that does things for other people. Like, poor you, you need me to help you out, as opposed to what I think you're describing as the nature of an ally.
Yeah, so where the width comes in is that if or communities, organizations have an idea, I'm going to go with them on their path of what they're doing. And so I'm not going to input my ideas and my perceptions. I may give them some input on, okay, this is the way the government looks at granting, or this is the way a mainstream organization may want to partner with you. So I'll give them input from
Hmm.
my white side brain, that because I've been born and bred that area, to help them on their so that they can understand how the community, the mainstream community works. Where the other side comes in is that sometimes they're not in the room. And so
Mhm.
sometimes I have to be an advocate for them, and as an ally I can advocate for them to make sure that they're included in the conversation. I can say, hey, time out, let's stop this conversation, or let's pause certain parts of it until we have communities with us on this journey. And
And
so,
I'd be willing to bet that some people aren't too crazy when you take that role. Like,
you know
oh,
what?
there goes Cam again,
You know what? And and I think for the and you would think that, but I come at it a very collective and and a and a listening voice. So I'll listen to the people's voice, and I will give them answers from my white guy brain if they ask me how would Indigenous community or what would their perspective on this be. So again, I'm a lot of times, because I've been doing this for 25 years, I'm I'm what you might call a navigator. So I'm navigating both sides of Indigenous worldview and mainstream worldview. And so um and so again, there are going to be people, as you say, David, there are going to be people that are going to say, I don't like what you're saying, Cam, and they're going to try to shut me down, and they're going to, they're seeing this whole issue as a political issue, as an issue that their organization shouldn't be engaged with. There's lots of bias that people have that just by me talking about it, it it puts their hairs back up, and they put resistance, and so um, that's in every organization, whether it's police departments, government, business, there's going to be resistors. And so I will work with those people, but the majority of people aren't resistors. The majority of our society um, um, want to learn, want to do better, want to help our brothers and sisters, no matter if they're Indigenous or non-Indigenous people. They want uh, to help better outcomes for our whole society. Um,
Yeah. I mean, I wish I had more observations that were consistent with that. Unfortunately, I've seen, so for example, in the community I'm in, I'm sure that no one listens to my podcast. Thank goodness. But I got a new mayor, and one of the first things he did was say, "We're not going to do a verbal land acknowledgement at the beginning of our meetings. We'll just have it in writing. People can read that for themselves." And this is after the previous mayor had spent tons of time with the three local First Nations establishing relationships. And I thought, why on earth would someone do that? Like, you can say the words without necessarily feeling them, although I think that's much better. But to not say them at all is a bit of a slap in the face, and I don't think it was safe for many of the staff who would have been supportive of the verbal acknowledgement to speak up and say so. And sometimes I hear these, land acknowledgements, and I'll be sitting at a table and I hear people say, "Oh, for crying out loud, do we have to do that every time? Like, it doesn't make a difference." And I've said, well, it actually does to me. It has some meaning to me, but there's some people feel that it's not really about reconciliation. It's like a political statement, and how you overcome that. I don't know. It's a source of frustration. If you have any insights on that, I'd love to
Yeah,
hear them.
I work with a lot of uh Rotarians, other service clubs, Lions, Kinsmen's, and this is and some clubs this is and again rural Alberta and some other areas is there that has been brought up, and and I don't think this is a point where, okay, let's throw out the baby with the bath. Let's delve into this. What does this mean? And where's the learning point in this? And my conversations with leaders in the community or individuals to say, you know what, when I go into somebody's house, I'll go in and say, "Wow, this is a beautiful house. You've kept it up really well. Thank you for inviting me to your house. I want to honor that. The people who've been here, and so I think if you look at it a different way,
Mhm.
and look at it a way um, that if we want to include more voices, more people in our community, it's not about putting more barriers in it. You say, okay, if we can open up some conversations and reduce barriers to all our communities, we will have a better society. And so by all of a sudden putting up your hand and say, no, we're not going to do that anymore. No, we're going and for these little things like a 2-minute land acknowledgement or having an elder come in and do an opening a session in a good way, um, I think it is coming out of a good mind and saying, okay, what am I going to learn from um, this conversation, what this person says. Um, when I teach people about land acknowledgements, it is about making it personal.
Mhm.
It's not, and it's not reading it off a script, and it can look at anything. And I've heard some really cool ones that people have said that just kind of make me pause. Oh, was that just an land acknowledgement? That was neat. Or an acknowledgement of the people, or acknowledgement of of the creator and the blessings we all have here. And so there are ways to do it and I guess where it comes off as kind of the standard of the fair is when somebody reads the same thing that everyone has heard over and over again, and then it's not authentic to anyone. I mean, and I think that's where it comes in. I think if we had the same, if you went to the church and the preacher said the same thing every day, it wouldn't come off as authentic.
No, I think um, I'm finding like I really want to have this conversation mostly because I want to project some of my own thoughts and concerns about it. But one of them is I think how do we become, and I want to say colon. Anytime you use a label, people reject the label, like colonists, where that whatever might happen to be. But I've had limited experience working with Indigenous groups, and when I have, the observation I've had that we have to let go of cynicism that's unfounded on, it doesn't come from it's from biases that have been formed. Who knows? We have to let go of our cynicism, temporarily suspend it, if you will, and also be more patient. I've gone to a couple of meetings where for the introductions, as people are going around, but it was actually for the BC Capacity Initiative out here was one of the meetings I'm thinking of. And, who are you? And so some folks would be saying, well, I'm David Gouthro, I'm a consultant, this, that, and the other thing, like 30 seconds, boom, gone. And then some of the folks that are from the different communities would start talking about their background and when they came to the land and stuff like that. And it took me a while to just kind of slow down and just really appreciate what's being said. That's as much as the part of the meeting as what the content of the meeting was actually going to be about. No, we're not trained that way. Business, time, fast, all that sort of stuff. And it's so nice to have the opportunity to slow down in a society and economy that kind of values rushing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I agree. A couple of points you make there. One is about, I call myself, and I'll start off some of the talks, not talking about colonization, but talking about settlers. I come from settler stock. We all do. Most of us here. One side of my settler stock is from Lebanon. The other one is from Ireland.
Hmm.
And they were both homesteaders in our, and I'm sure they had lots of different positive, negative interactions with First Nations people. Um, and so the other part that you make is about cynicism and patience. Just as we have it, they have it as well. There has been many people that look like you and I that have come into them, whether they're the churches, the government, businesses, saying, "Hey, we're going to do things differently," and they've been burnt by it. There's been academics that have gone on and taken their knowledge of their history, their medicines, and taken advantage of it for their own personal good. Um, and so one of my elders, Casey Eagle Speaker, has a really good quote that he's allowed me to use, and it's called "Relationships are built at the speed of trust." And it's you've got to build that trust first, and it's that time you take. The number of hours I've spent, sitting in a sweat or sitting at a coffee shop with an elder or Indigenous person, and just building a relationship, the eyes to eyes, where they can see that I am honest and I'm going to be there. I'm not just there in and out because of my position in whatever organization, but I'm in there for the long term. I've been doing this now 25 years. And so the community knows that Cam is with us. Cam is an ally. Cam is a friend. He's gonna, whatever he does, he's doing it with a good heart and with patience. So I've built the trust and the relationship with them, and I think that's what's missing. Is, as you're right, is we don't take the time, because when I've been in with Indigenous people, elders and leaders, is they do take a lot longer to get to the point, but they do it through storytelling. And when you listen to the story, and you say, "Oh, I get it." And if I would have stopped them early, or if I would have shut myself off early, I wouldn't have got the lesson. But they're teaching me a lesson in their story every time that somebody talks.
Well, I think one of the nice things about stories is that it's much easier to spread the word and recount a story to someone else rather than try to remember all the facts that you heard about how many of this, how many of that, and convey that to someone else. We hold on to them more tightly. I was thinking about some myths and things. Well, first of all, anytime I've worked with an Indigenous group, as soon as I think I start to know something, the very next experience, like, no, not even the, scratching the surface. I was doing some work on Vancouver Island with the Tsiminas First Nation and the town of Ladysmith. And, they wanted to talk about how they could work together more effectively. And it was the First Nation that suggested this, that let's get your elders, your town councilors, and our elders together just to get to know each other. Like, let's not talk about doing work. Let's just get to know each other. And one of the things that we did that was, looking back, was a little risky. If I'd been smarter or wiser, I might not have tried it, but it worked out okay. And I said, okay, most of the times I had them working in groups with a mix of the First Elders, First Nations elders, and the town's the counselors. But for this one, I said, I want you to separate into your two groups. And what I want you to do is describe what you think they think about you that isn't true. So what are the myths that you think they hold about you that you can clarify? And it was really powerful. Things like, well, we think that the Semitis elders say, we think that you think that we just want government handouts. We can't stand getting government handouts. We want to be able to stand on our own. We don't want to be recipients of charity, or that you think that we don't want to work hard, or all kinds of things like that. And then it went the opposite way, and it was a really way to get all that stuff that people were thinking but were afraid of talking about up on the surface, and to hear people talk about their truth and their perception of it. The only thing that they all agreed upon, the town councilor said, "We think that you think that white men can't hunt." And everyone laughed because, yeah, well, that's true. Everyone knows that. But it was, and what that made me think about is, about the patients. I think that one of the things that missing are the opportunities to have conversations with someone else rather than about someone else. I was at a conference the last few days on world cities, and the focus was on how you create inclusive cities that foster relationships of all sorts and things like that. And a couple of comments were that we need more spaces where people can get together just to be with each other in the same place and have conversations person to person rather than category to category. And so, how did you go about developing that trust? And what are some recommendations you make for someone else that says, I really want to know more? How do you do that without coming at it from uh, you know, inadvertently victimizing the person they're asking the question of, because there's kind of comes from a position of superiority. I really want to get to know you better, as opposed to let's build a bridge to get to know each other better.
Yeah, I think yeah, and that was where I was really lucky. One was, going to their events or going to their meetings
Mm.
that they were hosting, and being the sole white guy in the meeting, and listening, and adding things when it was appropriate when asked. And then, or is going to the powwows or going to the different events, and then also inviting them to our events, and then also down the road doing some collaborative events, like sitting on committees that were doing round dances, and or doing, that were applying for grants. And because I was a grantor, I knew the processes, and through this process, I was able to, um, again, build the trust that I was like one of them. One of my elders calls me the white elder because I'm there. Everyone knows I'm there for them. Um, that I've done the work. I've gone to sweats and to vision quests. I've been given a Blackfoot name, Agutsta Pinakum, meaning red morning. And so, I've been acknowledged on many different levels to have a certain amount of rights and responsibilities, enough to make me dangerous, that um, I can teach my tribe, but I'm always aware that it's cultural appreciation, not appropriation. So I don't use any of this for my own good. I don't get paid for speaking on behalf of Indigenous people or Indigenous issues. What my role is, I think, is to help my tribe, the white tribe, on how we do things better. And one of the things to your second question, David, was what I have done is figure out ways to bring people together. And so, um, I've hosted a number of events um, through Rotary or through other venues where we just get people together. Um, and in one event, we did like a speed dating where we had, Indigenous organizations and service clubs come and okay, get to know each other, talk, find out what your dreams and wishes are for 5-10 minutes, and then we're going to switch it up. Um, and out of those conversations, even those, the cards that were exchanged or the follow-up discussions that happened, it was a spark that would never have happened unless we've got the people together breaking bread, and having fun together, and realizing that we have mutual aspirations for our society, and where they link. So one service organization said, "Oh, I'm interested in seniors," and that's what our club wants to do. Another one said youth, so they kind of gravitated to a seniors group or a Indigenous youth organization that they could kind of start, germinating some ideas together.
So yeah, let's hope I don't I don't make this awkward for myself. But, so, you go to some events, like you go to a potlatch or a sweat or something like that. How does a person do that makes it okay for themselves and okay for the people that they're going into that event? Like, what goes on in your head, and how do you make it acceptable for someone else to be there? Like, sometimes I've been asked to speak on, and one of my clients said, we need to talk about more DEI and diversity and inclusion in our organization. I'm saying, why are you asking a white guy? Like, this is a symbol of the problem, right? Quite frankly, like, to ask me to do it in that case didn't make sense. But how do you find those opportunities? Again, speak for myself. There's probably a lot of people I know that are Indigenous heritage, and I don't know because they don't go around wearing something that says, hey, I'm part this, that, or the other thing. So I don't know how to approach people. And if I did, we've got a lot of events on the North Shore here in Vancouver. Like, how do you know when it's okay to attend? How do you get permission? How do you allow for a meeting of person to person rather than category to category in a case like that? Like, where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, two things I tell people. One is to do your homework as much as you can. There's so much online anyways. And there's workshops, courses you could take to get some basic knowledge about history and but as you mentioned, you also don't want to generalize. Once you learn a certain fact, you can't generalize that across all nations because our country is so vast and experiences with colonization and settlers is so much different across from province to province. Um, Second to that, I tell, and we have this conversation with Indigenous people as well when I bring people together, is it's eh, I'm sure you've heard about having safe spaces,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
to create safe
Yeah.
spaces.
Mhm.
I'm more of a fan when we're doing this to have a brave space.
Mhm.
So have a brave conversation, which means you bravely go into it, knowing you're going to be challenged, knowing that it's going to shock some of your myths or perception, but be brave enough to take that in and not shut it out, and listen to the other people. And for the people who's talking, to be brave enough to tell their truth, um, with honesty and humility, to say, this is how I'm feeling today. This is how, what this is how my perception of, I mean, I've heard that my perception of you being in this room. This is, I don't know you, other people do, but I'm willing to, work this out type of thing. But having those honest conversations where in Canada, I always say we're, we're very polite racists. Where compared to in the States, where people will call people different words into their face, and actually the marginalized communities like it that way better because they know where they're coming from. Here, we'll smile, but our body language and the intent of what we're doing will come through. And so
Mm.
I think it is really important to be brave when you're going into those spaces and to go in. I mean, I've gone into everything from to mosques to synagogues to sweat lodges, and I've gone into it saying, you know what, I'm just here as a as a learner, as a participant. And every time I've gone in and asked humble questions, I've got amazing responses and answers. And if I've made a mistake, if I've put something down wrong, or I've gone the wrong way in a sweat lodge, they're very uh, they're they're very and the way that they correct me is in a very nice, passionate way. They'll say, you know what, we don't do it this way. So,
Mm.
don't go this way, go left and go right, go left instead of right. Because, and they'll tell me why. And so it's a learning, everything's a learning. And so if I go into it as a learner and with the humility and humbleness,
Mm.
I've, they're willing to go overcome my faux pas. And I think that's what we have to be aware of. And we can't go into saying, "Oh, I know everything because I've read it or taken a course or I've gone to one sweat, and then I go into another one, and the elder hosts it totally different." I can say, "Well, that's not the way I was taught." So, and you'll see that. I mean, when I go into ceremony with different elders, um, they'll say, "Okay, we're going to follow the lead elder at his home territory because I know it's going to be different than I do it. But I'm just going to follow their lead because it's their ceremony." And so the same thing when we go in, again, when we go into their land, um, we just ask. How do we do this? When I go into the big festivals, whether it's a powwow or um, or a sun dance or a round dance, um, I'll I'll sometimes try to find someone or a family that looks like they've been there before, whether they're white or they're Indigenous. I say, "Hey, what's happening next? What's next on the agenda?" And and next thing you know, we're best friends, and they're telling me stories, and because you know they see that I'm in there with a good spirit. I'm there just to learn and to support them.
You know, I think that first of all, I like the brave space. I love that description of it. And and maybe it's a function of age. I like to think rather than I'm aging gracefully, I'm aging gratefully. What I'm grateful for is that I don't have to be so quick to leap to judgment.
Mm.
And it occurred to me, with any group or any person that's different from me, if there is some way that I like using some of this CRISPR gene editing technology, where someone can go in and clip out a person's judgment gene and insert a curiosity gene, and to stay in curiosity. So rather than trying to show what I know, I show that I don't know by the questions that I ask, my willingness to listen. And I've found that in most cases, if my intention is clear, people are very happy to educate me. And if I'm working with a group of people that, for whatever reason, I'm not familiar with, I usually start by saying, there is a very good chance that I'm going to say something stupid or inappropriate. Try hard as I will, that's likely to happen. I would really appreciate it if you could let me know at the time, right? Rather than when you go into the wash and say, what an idiot that guy is, who hired him? Let me know because I want to do better. I don't want to be better. You'd be doing me a favor, right? So I say this not to be patronizing. I know that I mess up in these things. I remember one time I was doing some work down in Suriname in South America, and there's a the Dutch culture from the Dutch colonists and the Anglo culture from the people that mine there, but there's also Surinamese culture, who are largely people that have come down from the mountains. And I remember one time I was getting people into having a conversation, a role play with all these mixed individuals. Said, okay, so you can feel free. I don't need to hear what you're talking about. Support that you have the conversation. Please feel free to use English or Dutch. or taki taki, because I read that in the guidebook that the native language is taki taki. And this woman went into a brave space because usually in the Dutch culture, you don't speak truth to power. It's very, very respectful. She said that, well, that's actually pretty insulting. And I could have gone into what's insulting. She said, when you use the word taki taki, and it could have said, well, but I read it in the guidebook, like this is the Surinamese language. And fortunately, I learned from having a teenage daughter that it's much better to say something like, oh, tell me more, help me understand. So she said when the Dutch colonists came down here, and the native population came down, the Dutch when they heard them talk, had said, "Oh, they're just talking," and that became tacky tacky. It was shortened to tacky tacky, which is actually an insult.
Mhm.
I would have never known that had she not been willing to educate me rather than just say there's another guy that doesn't know what the heck he's talking about, and to be comfortable not knowing, or is, I think, such a gift that we can give to each other, but certainly people that are different from ourselves.
Yeah, and I think, and that's where I've learned. I mean, since I've been on this journey the last 25 years, it has been a gift to me because I have changed the way I see the world.
Mm,
The way Indigenous First Nations family raise their grandchildren, it makes me a better grandparent
mm,
because it's not like, in our culture, okay, I'm done being a parent, but, they actually are more invested in raising their grandkids, which allows their kids to go and earn a living. And so there's lots of things that I've learned that if I would have shut down things or not listened or paid attention to that to that to that and other cultures that have made me a better father, a better grandparent, a better community citizen. And I think that that's the value of taking the time, listening, um, and the nuanced things of both the language and their worldviews.
So if you were to offer some suggestions, like to say there's some listeners there that are thinking, I want to know more, I want to learn more, I want to do better in terms of my relationships with Indigenous peoples. I don't know where to start. What are and I know you've got some resources, so make sure those are in the program notes. You've got a book and things like that, which is fabulous. But for someone that's listening, they're driving along and they're thinking, "Oh my gosh, I'd really like to get better at understanding and being um, more supportive, not just in agreeing in my head, but actually doing something differently." What are two or three steps that just about anyone could take?
Yeah, I think
Cam?
anyone can take it because in the world I've been doing this work with, whether it's in diverse communities, including Indigenous communities, people say, "How did you do it?" And I said, "People have come at it from different angles. I came at it from a law enforcement. Friends of mine have come at it from educators or psychologists, different fields, even engineers. And I think it's looking at where, we all come from different education, different backgrounds, and looking at what um, I won't say power and privilege because that's a big thing, but looking at what sector or what um, and again, it might be the power, it might be the influence you have because of your education, because your background, because what your company does, and figure out where that fits in with Indigenous peoples. Um, you know, you know, if it is about geology and land, well, of course, they're very close to the land, and they want to protect the land, but they realize, the environment and natural resources, mining natural resources are important for all of us, and so figure out how you work with them. So I've worked with engineers and stuff on that, looking at okay, doctors and nurses and maternal health. Well, we know Indigenous have lower, have worse health outcomes, including maternal and youth outcomes, higher addiction rates. Well, as a doctor or someone in the medical field, you can say, I'm gonna, I'm gonna, I'm gonna learn more and see how I can help with what my trade craft is in that area.
Mm.
And so, finding out what your power and privilege, where you can use that for the good of the community, and coming into the community and say, listen, I've got this skill set. Um, is there a community group or a society or some part of the nation, whether it's urban or rural, that I can start building relations and finding out where that fits. And again, it's not coming in, I know everything, but saying, hey, can I sit on a committee? Can I listen in on this conversation you have about homelessness or housing or because that interests me. And it's those little steps. Again, relationships are built as trust. It's those little steps of doing that. And that's how I got it. I started getting in that way in the area of human rights um, and working on justice issues. Well, next thing you know, I was invited to different tables. And then I was invited to, hey, Cam, would you like to come to a sweat? And I always thought it would be nice to go. And I said no. And then they said, hey, we got another sweat coming up. Would you like to come? Okay, I'm ready now. And so, like, and so, they're not trying to push on their spirituality, their religion on us or their culture, but they, just like I would invite them into my house for dinner or events, they invite me. And I think it's that reciprocal and it does take time because again, it's not that the Western way. Okay, I'm going to send an email and let me know when we can meet and have coffee and then make a decision. It doesn't happen that quick. But what I found is by taking my time and enjoying the process, and learning and building relationships, um, it has been able to make my life so strong. But it's able to give me the voice that I always say. I've got my Blackfoot name, Red Morning. I've got an eagle feather. I'm allowed to carry a pipe. Those aren't trophies that are sitting on my mantle. These are things that I live on, and that they are. The community has asked me to keep on holding the mantle, the feather, and support them and walk with them wherever I can. And so it's been a real blessing to be able to have that trust in the community, and that when I ask for something or somebody asks for me, another white guy says, "Hey, could you have a speaker?" and stuff like that. And when I refer someone to them, it's like a nice warm handoff, and they can get that. Or, hey, I need someone who can that's interested in environment. Can you? And so the other part of that question, David, is to find those navigators, Indigenous and non-Indigenous navigators that can help you in that soft entry, that soft handoff, because it is daunting when you first go in to walk into a room. But if you get that soft handoff that someone is, it's almost like when I was a policeman. When I was a policeman, the way we would get into a drug cartel or a drug operation is we'd get somebody to introduce us into as their buddy. Hey, here's my buddy. He's a friend. You can start dealing with them. And so the same thing here. Here's my buddy Cam. Can you he's a good guy, and can you help him? He wants to learn more about can he join this committee, or can he come to the round dance? And so somebody has done the intro for me, which just softens the conversation.
Reminds me of many, many years ago, many decades ago. I was down in New Mexico, and I was going out with a woman whose father was involved in the economic development of the 8 northern pueblos in New Mexico. And so he took me around to the different pueblos and introduced me to the governors, which is like the chief of some of the First Nations up here. And because he knew them and trusted them, and they knew that he was in their corner, I was able to have a conversation that I'd never be able to otherwise. So okay, hear this, folks. Keep your eyes out for those navigators, right? If you really want to get in, that'll make for a softer entry.
Yeah.
So I guess the last thing that occurs to me, Cam, is that I think when it comes to people who are different from one another, we all need to think of ourselves as potential bridge builders. So how do I build a bridge? What do I need to know about me to build that bridge? What do I need to know about whoever's on the other side to build that bridge? That we have something in common, either a challenge to overcome or an opportunity to address that helps us build that bridge. And then we have to maintain that bridge and repair that bridge. And I think if every single person in our society started to think of themselves as a bridge builder, how much better off we would be. And I'd like to thank you very much for being a bridge builder and our understanding of how to be with people who are different than we are. with Indigenous peoples of Canada here. And yeah, I'm so grateful for your willingness to be here.
My pleasure. All my relations. Thanks. And I really enjoyed this conversation.
So, David Gouthro, another episode of Discover Fresh Perspectives. All I can guarantee is that next week there'll be another guest with some different perspectives. So come on back and let's get some more. Subscribe now, because on Fresh Perspectives, every episode is an opportunity to explore new horizons and redefine what's achievable.